The night sky is a liar. What you think you see, the quiet stars, the harmless trails of ice and dust, might be something else entirely. Tonight, you're not just watching another video, you're stepping into a story stitched together from whispers, anomalies, and signals no one was ever supposed to find. This isn't science fiction. This is what happens when the universe blinks, and we're lucky or unlucky enough to notice. Before we dive in, I want to know something about you. What are you doing right now, at this very moment, as this plays? What city are you in, and what time is it there? Write it below. Let's see who else is awake, staring at the unknown with us. And remember, building videos like this takes 15 to 20 hours of research, writing, and editing. If you want us to keep uncovering the secrets the stars are trying to hide, make sure to subscribe. It's the smallest gesture with the biggest impact, and it keeps the darkness talking. Fact 1. Astronomers first noticed that 3I Atlas wasn't moving the way an interstellar visitor should. Its speed, instead of remaining constant or increasing, as gravity flung it outward, was subtly decreasing. Not chaotically, not through random bursts of gas, but smoothly, precisely as though something inside it had tapped invisible brakes. Space is nearly perfect emptiness. Nothing out there should slow an object so far from the pull of planets or the drag of atmospheres. Yet the math refused to lie, and neither did the sensors. Outgassing was ruled out. Solar pressure didn't fit. It was as though the comet itself had decided to change speed, obeying not nature, but intention. What could alter its own trajectory with such delicate precision? A machine? A message? Or something far more unsettling, something alive, steering silently through our solar system? Fact 2. Long-range radio telescopes began to register a faint pattern coming from the region of space 3I Atlas occupied. A rhythm too quiet to attract immediate attention, yet persistent enough to survive scrutiny. At first, it was dismissed as static interference, a trick of overlapping signals, until stations across different continents confirmed the same subtle pulse. It wasn't evenly mechanical, nor was it chaotic. Instead, it carried the soft irregularity of something organic, like a heartbeat caught between worlds. The signal grew, then weakened, then returned with slight variation, as though adjusting or responding to some hidden cue. No natural comet had ever throbbed with radio noise like this. Some scientists feared contamination of data, others whispered about something far more unnerving. What if this wasn't a signal at all, but a pulse? The quiet sign of a hidden life form, traveling frozen and silent through the dark. Fact 3. Light from 3I Atlas refused to behave like ordinary sunlight, reflecting off dust and ice. Instead of a smooth, brightening curve as it approached the sun, it blinked in deliberate sequences, rising and falling in a rhythm that, when stripped to pure data, resembled binary strings. At first, it seemed like coincidence, a random echo of rotation or irregular surface shedding material. But then the numbers became impossible to ignore. Sequences matching prime numbers, coded intervals, in the language of mathematics itself. A language shared not by culture, but by the very structure of reality. Observatories worldwide confirmed the same flicker, each report feeding a growing chill. No natural body in recorded history had ever produced light modulation that mimicked intelligent code. Either the universe had invented mathematics twice, or something aboard that frozen traveler was using light to whisper to anyone watching. Fact 4. When spectrographs dissected the starlight passing through 3I Atlas's coma, they found chemical fingerprints no comet should possess. Traces of refined alloys, metals shaped not in stellar cores nor planetary collisions, but in controlled, industrial-like conditions, sat like ghosts within the data. Nickel and iron were expected, cobalt, perhaps, but alloys built from complex blends, aligned in ratios known only from manufacturing on Earth, had no place in deep space ice. The signals were faint, but repeatable. Their presence confirmed by independent teams, unwilling to trust first impressions, yet unable to erase what the instruments said. If contamination was impossible, then something about the comet's heart had once been forged, assembled, not born. This was no ordinary traveler from the stars. It might not even be debris. It could be a fragment of something built, ancient and purposeful, riding a path we were never meant to see. Fact 5. The tale of three IATLAS developed patterns no comet had ever displayed. Instead of chaotic sprays and random jets of sublimating ice, the streaming material left clean, evenly spaced gaps, as if matter were being released in intervals. Like the pulses of an engine, like a countdown disguised as debris. The voids appeared, vanished, and then returned in symmetry that nature rarely creates. Telescopic images captured the eerie rhythm, gas, gap, a metronome of cosmic engineering echoing in silence. Thruster exhaust, some speculated. Pressure vents under timed release, others guessed. But whatever it was, it obeyed. A schedule, not a law. Something inside the comet was shedding mass, not because of heat, but because something wanted it to, timing each release like signals, like steps, like the breath of a machine quietly preparing to move again. Fact 6. As the story of 3I Atlas spread, old myths clawed their way back into relevance, from Mesopotamian clay tablets to obscure Chinese scrolls, from Mayan carvings to whispered prophecies in forgotten monasteries. Fragments spoke of a traveler from the outer dark, returning when 3 constellations aligned, the very alignment under which this object now streaked through our sky. A tale of fire, a voice of thunder, an omen not of doom but of awakening. Scholars argued coincidence. Others grew quiet. The precision was unnerving, the timing chilling. Were these stories warnings? Were they memories? If humanity had seen this traveler before, in an age before telescopes, before electricity, before written science, then one terrifying question lingered in every sleepless historian's mind. Was this a visitor or a returning host, coming back exactly when it said it would? Fact 7. In the heart of scientific instruments built to detect the rarest particles in the universe, a spike occurred, a sharp, unexpected burst of neutrinos. Particles so elusive, they passed through planets as though through smoke. It coincided precisely with 3 IATLAS's closest approach to the sun. No flare, no supernova, no cosmic catastrophe explained it. Just a sudden, clean surge of ghost matter, invisible to almost everything, timed perfectly with the comet's movement. Neutrinos rarely cluster. They rarely behave in any way we notice. But this was noticed, logged, confirmed, and feared. If something aboard 3I Atlas interacted with neutrinos deliberately, then it meant the traveler carried technology, or biology, that operated on a scale beyond human comprehension. A signal, a power source, or a door unlocking quietly in the night, waiting for someone or something to step through. Fact 8. Under ultraviolet scrutiny, 3 IATLAS revealed a narrow, blinding spectral band that no database recognized. Not hydrogen, not helium, not any noble gas or known molecule. It was as if someone had found a color humanity was never meant to see, a slice of the electromagnetic spectrum that shouldn't exist in a comet, or in nature at all. The band remained stable, repeating every time it was observed, immune to angle, distance, or equipment. If it was natural, then the periodic table was incomplete in ways that rewrote astrophysics. If artificial, then we were staring at material, designed, engineered, perhaps cultivated in laboratories orbiting suns we have never mapped. And it was here now, drifting invisibly in our cosmic neighborhood. A silent artifact humming in a frequency that felt less like discovery and more like invitation. Fact 9. Comets heat as they near the sun. their surfaces boiling, their cores bleeding vapor into space. But 3I Atlas behaved like it wanted the opposite. Instruments recorded plummeting temperatures in regions directly exposed to solar radiation, an impossible cooling effect, a thermal inversion that mocked the most basic rules of heat. Something on or within the comet was not absorbing sunlight. It was rejecting it, expelling energy in a way that seemed not like failure, but defense, as though it was preserving something delicate inside, shielding a core from heat that should have cracked it open. In the cold of space, heat is life, and cold is silence. But this cold was not silence. This cold was a wall built not to protect the universe from it, but to protect it from us. Fact 10. For 3 unremarkable hours, on a September night, 2 deep space probes went quiet. Not destroyed, not malfunctioning, just gone. Their clocks froze. Their data logs flatlined, and when they reawakened, neither recorded any time passing at all. The only shared trait between the two was geometry. Both had been perfectly aligned with 3I Atlas during the blackout. No radiation spike, no hardware glitch, no known cosmic phenomenon explained it. Probability sneered at the coincidence. Engineers wrote it off anyway. But whispers began in dark offices and late-night calls. What if they weren't broken? What if they were borrowed? For 3 hours, they weren't ours. For 3 hours, they listened to something else. Something that spoke without speaking, reached without touching, and returned what it took, leaving behind only silence, suspicion, and the terrifying certainty that it had worked. Fact 11. The trajectory of 3I Atlas looked simple at first, a graceful hyperbolic curve, the textbook path of a comet, visiting once and then vanishing forever. But then a tiny correction appeared, not in our measurements, but in the math itself. Observatories recalculating its path found subtle, consistent deviations that lined up not with gravity or solar wind, but with something acting like navigation. The curve bent a fraction here, straightened a whisper there, as if invisible thrusters were trimming the route. No natural outgassing model explained the uniformity. It was precise, almost surgical. This wasn't a rock falling through a cosmic canyon. It was a traveler, avoiding something we couldn't see. And in orbital mechanics, intent is terrifying. A comet moves where it's thrown. A ship moves where it chooses. And 3I Atlas was choosing. Fact 12. Deep spectrum. Microphones aimed at the comet's surrounding plasma detected something that didn't belong. Low-frequency oscillations, not electromagnetic, not magnetic, but acoustic sound carried not through air, but through charged particles. The sun's solar wind screamed silently across its tail, yet beneath that chaos, a soft modulation pulsed like a hidden beacon. The noise was below human hearing, but when sped up, it resembled a slow, careful melody, a progression too symmetrical to dismiss. Waves rose and fell with geometric precision, as if a giant tuning fork buried in ice was ringing out across the void. Natural plasma resonance. Maybe, or maybe a warning, not a message for us, but a call to something else, waiting, listening, ancient and patient, beyond the reach of every human ear, except those reckless enough to turn the static into music. Fact 13. As 3I Atlas drifted closer to the inner solar system, infrared telescopes noticed something impossible, shadows inside its own coma. Not surface irregularities, not dust occlusion, actual moving shapes that blocked heat signatures where no solid should be. They shifted against each other like machinery in motion, hidden inside a veil of ice and vapor. Some claimed it was debris tumbling, but the velocity profiles didn't match. These objects were moving against the comet's spin, not with it. Like cogs turning against a wheel, they obeyed an inner logic, a rhythm too controlled to be random. We weren't looking at a rock anymore. We were watching a shell, a disguise, a host hiding something far more complex inside, Something that rotated not for balance, but for function. Something still running. Fact 14. Magnetic field readings near 3I. Atlas behaved like a heartbeat. Under stress, spiking, calming, spiking again, in patterns that eerily matched the variations of a human ECG. Spacecraft hundreds of millions of kilometers away registered minute fluctuations aligned with the comet's proximity to the sun, like a nervous system reacting to heat and pressure. Magnetic storms can be wild, chaotic, brutal, but these waves had cadence. They read less like nature and more like a response, stimulus, reaction, adaptation. No model of charged particle interaction explained it. No simulation of dust and plasma produced anything so unnervingly biological. It was as though the comet wasn't simply a vessel. It was an organism, and we were watching it flinch as our star's gravity pulled at something buried deep inside. Something that did not want to wake. Fact 15. When a passing asteroid crossed behind 3I Atlas, an opportunity presented itself. A natural backlight to probe its density by observing starlight distortion. The result made no sense. Instead of bending light predictably through mass, the readings suggested negative deflection, as though light had been slightly accelerated around it, not slowed. A gravitational lens can bend light. Only exotic physics can twist it forward. That left physicists with two equally horrifying options. Either 3I Atlas carried a field we didn't understand, or it wasn't made of matter in the way matter usually behaves. If it was artificial, then its creators had tamed gravity, bent it, shaped it like metal on an anvil. And if they had, then the comet wasn't visiting our solar system by chance. It had arrived with absolute, terrifying precision. Fact 16. Amateur astronomers comparing early photographs of 3I Atlas with recent ones found a subtle horror. The object's rotation period was shortening, not because it was shedding mass, that would have slowed it, but as though someone, or something, was winding it up. The spin increased in smooth, clean increments, like a flywheel gaining speed under constant torque. A comet shouldn't accelerate its rotation deliberately. Too fast, and centrifugal force tears it apart. But 3I Atlas seemed to know its own limits, dancing at the edge of structural failure, yet never crossing it, like a predator stretching before the hunt, like a machine charging for something it hadn't yet revealed. The question wasn't why it was spinning faster. The question was, what happens when it reaches the exact rotation it's aiming for? Fact 17. On one uneventful night, a faint burst of gamma radiation swept through a slice of sky barely wide, enough to cover 3I Atlas. Not a cosmic explosion, not a flare, not anything catalogued. It was a narrow, surgical beam, so quick that most sensors ignored it. But those that caught it logged something uncanny. The signature matched neither random bursts nor known artificial interference. It was structured, layered like a code, hidden in violence, like a whisper smuggled through thunder. Gamma bursts kill cells, fry electronics, sterilize planets, but this one barely kissed our detectors, a precise pulse that hurt nothing yet screamed of intent. If someone was using 3I Atlas as cover, maybe this was their test fire, not at us, but at distance, a reminder that what we were observing had teeth. Fact 18. Researchers simulating 3I Atlas's orbit backward in time discovered that, millions of years ago, it had passed through another star system, one known to host planets in its habitable zone. That alone would have been coincidence. But then came the eerie symmetry. The trajectory passed close enough to sling through again, almost like a loop, as if the object were visiting known coordinates in a predetermined cycle. Stars move, gravity changes, space is chaos. Yet this path threaded needles across epochs, as though following a map written not in starlight, but in intention. If it had visited others before, then maybe Earth wasn't a destination at random. Maybe we were next on a list written long before we learned to crawl from caves and look up in wonder at the cold. Black Sea above us. Fact 19. When 3IATLAS passed behind the sun from Earth's view, for a few days we couldn't watch it directly. But then something stranger than invisibility occurred. Radio signals across certain bands grew quiet, like a curtain had fallen over specific frequencies. Not all, just a few. The same few used by deep space communications. Engineers panicked. Solar storms were ruled out. Ground systems checked clean. For those 3 days, parts of the sky went dead, like someone had muted space itself, and when the comet returned from behind the sun, the channels came alive again, with static that, when filtered, carried faint, deliberate modulations. Not words, not language, but structure. It was as if someone had used the sun as a shield, had spoken where no one could watch, and then had gone silent again. On purpose. Fact 20. The final horror came from the quietest corner of astronomy. The gravitational wave observatories. They had recorded nothing, until a subtle tremor appeared, not from colliding black holes, not from neutron star quakes, but from something local to local. A low rolling ripple of spacetime itself coincided with the comet's passage near the asteroid belt. It wasn't strong, it wasn't dangerous, but it was shaped. A wave that began, peaked, and ceased with timing, too precise to be cosmic accident. Space doesn't shiver for rocks. It only quakes when titans move, when mass bends reality. If 3-1 Atlas caused that, then it wasn't just a traveler. It was carrying something heavy enough, deliberate enough, to punch a fingerprint into space-time. And fingerprints mean only one thing. Somebody, somewhere, left them there to be found. Fact 21. As 3I Atlas moved through the Kuiper belt, instruments tracking cosmic rays noticed a sudden dip, a quieting of the usual background hiss that permeates everything beyond Neptune. It was like a hush had fallen over that cold frontier, as if invisible curtains had been drawn across the stars themselves. No other bodies in the region produced this effect. No other travelers ever dimmed the cosmic chatter. The drop wasn't total, just enough to be noticed by those who knew what normal sounded like someone lowering their voice when they don't want to be overheard. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it carried not just mass but influence, dampening the very background of the universe for a heartbeat of cosmic time. The question no one wanted to ask aloud was simple. Who, or what, benefits from turning down the noise, just as it drifts past Earth? Fact 22. Photometric analysis revealed an uncanny consistency in certain bright points on the comet's surface. They didn't move with rotation the way ordinary spots of ice would. Instead, they tracked a different frame entirely, sliding just out of alignment, then back again, as though following instructions we couldn't read. Some speculated reflective minerals. Others saw deliberate sensors, eyes staring back at the astronomers, staring at them. One flare, in particular, returned at exactly the same time each day, for 5 days, regardless of the comet's angle to the sun, as though it wasn't reflecting sunlight at all. It was broadcasting intentionally, rhythmically, not to us, perhaps, but through us, across us, to somewhere else. If so, then our telescopes weren't just observing. They were being observed in return. Fact 23. For a brief, unpublicized window, a powerful radar ping aimed at 3IATLA has returned something impossible. An echo that arrived out of sequence, a fragment of signal that came back before the main pulse. In radar, time is truth. Nothing returns before it is sent. But this did. It was as if the signal had looped, bent, or slipped through a pocket of space where causality no longer applied in the usual way. The teams that saw it buried the data behind quiet non-disclosure agreements, calling it instrument error to avoid panic. But for those few who understood the raw logs, the chill was permanent. If a returning echo precedes the outgoing wave, then the target isn't just reflecting, it's anticipating. Fact 24. As 3I Atlas approached its perihelion, Amateur radio enthusiasts began reporting bursts of static that carried within them faint, eerie harmonics. Most dismissed it as atmospheric distortion. A handful recorded, slowed, and analyzed it, and found sequences repeating in ratios mirroring the orbital periods of planets. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, each woven like notes into a cosmic chord only a machine, or a mind, would choose. It didn't last long, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. But for a brief week, radios turned into haunted instruments, humming a melody of orbits as though the comet were singing the music of the spheres, or quietly marking each world it intended to visit. Fact 25. Observatories tracking dust particles ejected from the comet discovered that some of them weren't slowing down. Instead of dispersing, they maintained formation, tiny motes of matter flying in lockstep, like a swarm obeying unseen commands. Gravity couldn't hold them. Electromagnetism couldn't explain them. Yet the cluster persisted, shrinking and expanding, in ways that suggested coordination rather than collision. It was dust behaving like a fleet, silent, obedient, waiting. If true, then 3I Atlas wasn't shedding debris randomly. It was deploying something: seeds, sensors, scouts, scattering pieces of itself into orbits we hadn't even noticed yet, leaving behind not a trail, but a network. Fact 26. Planetary defense teams modeling worst-case scenarios for 3IATLAS's path found something maddening. No matter how they adjusted the data, the error margins collapsed toward Earth's crossing probabilities that were statistically absurd. Not high, but mathematically too clean. Random trajectories produce chaotic clouds of possible futures. This one produced a knife's edge, a corridor that threaded peril and safety with surgical neatness, as if someone had drawn a path through a storm with deliberate intent to skim, not strike. If it were aiming for us, it could have done so easily, but it didn't. Instead, it moved like a predator circling prey, not attacking, not retreating, just learning. Fact 27. During a high-resolution imaging session, a peculiar glow appeared, briefly on one hemisphere of 3IATLAS. Not a jet, not reflected light, a glow from within, pulsing once, faint and blue, before vanishing like it had never existed. Cameras confirmed it. Software tried to scrub it, but pixels don't hallucinate. Something inside had powered up for seconds only, and then gone silent again. If it was chemical, it had no precedent. If it was mechanical, it was the first time humanity had seen an alien machine try, just for a moment, to breathe. Fact 28. Tidal models predicted stresses on 3I Atlas as it neared planetary alignments. Those stresses should have cracked it, producing new jets, fresh dust, fractures, but it held. It didn't just hold, it flexed. Measurements indicated its shape changed minutely, not by breaking but by shifting, as if its structure weren't rigid at all. Rocks don't flex, ice doesn't flex, but vessels might. And the more it moved, the more the models broke, until the only way to reconcile them was to stop calling it a comet and start calling it what it behaved like: a craft. Fact 29. For one terrifying evening, every telescope aimed at 3I Atlas reported the same thing. Nothing. It was gone. Not dimmed, not occluded, simply absent. Coordinates that had tracked it precisely for months now stared into empty sky. Hours later, it reappeared, exactly where predictions said it should be, as though reality had been paused, rewritten, or folded just long enough to hide it from every eye at once. Nature doesn't do that, but stealth might. Fact 30. Finally, as Earth rotated beneath the watching skies, a new star appeared briefly near the comet, faint, wrong-colored, unlisted in any catalog. It shimmered for 10 minutes, then faded, leaving no trace in archival comparisons. Theories bloomed like weeds: a background star flaring, a cosmic ray, a glitch. But deep in certain secured archives, the annotation beside the frame was simpler, colder, impossible to misinterpret. Object joined trajectory. Now 2. Fact 31. The first gravitational tug that didn't belong to any known planet was noticed by a quiet team of analysts buried in routine calculations. They weren't looking for anomalies. They were looking for confirmation of old math. But when 3I Atlas skimmed past Jupiter's orbit, its velocity changed by a hair more than Jupiter's pull should allow. At first, they blamed the usual suspects: computational rounding, minor measurement lag, even solar pressure variations. But every correction brought the same unnerving result. Something besides Jupiter had tugged on it. There was nothing in that sector of space large enough to do it. Nothing hidden, nothing charted. Unless, of course, the mass wasn't there all the time. Unless the tug wasn't gravity at all, but something else, like a controlled burn. A maneuver too gentle to light up our telescopes yet strong enough to bend its path away from a truth we weren't supposed to see. That was when whispers turned into late-night phone calls. Fact 32. Photographs of 3I Atlas, taken weeks apart, revealed a horrifying symmetry that nature simply doesn't produce. Dust jets usually emerge randomly, sculpted by local heat and chaotic fractures. But in these images, 3 vents had aligned perfectly along a great circle, like a design etched into its icy shell. When superimposed, the vents mapped onto an equilateral triangle, a triangle that held its proportions despite the comet's rotation, precession, and changing sunlight angles. Random coincidence is a scientist's shield. It explains everything until it explains nothing. This triangle explained nothing. Too clean, too stable. It looked less like geology and more like architecture. Some called it pareidolia, human brains, imposing patterns where none exist. Others saw something older, colder, geometry not as decoration, but as function. A trinity of controlled exhaust ports, landing markers, or the edges of something beneath the ice, waiting, quiet, deliberate, a blueprint carved into a moving tomb. Fact 33. During a fleeting occultation, when 3I Atlas passed in front of a distant star, astronomers expected a brief dimming, a shadow sliding across sensors like a blink. What they got instead was distortion. The starlight didn't just dim, it refracted, twisting into concentric rings like ripples on water disturbed by an invisible hand. It was gravitational lensing, but too weak to be gravity, too structured to be coincidence. For several seconds, the star's light painted a perfect waveform, before returning to normal, as though space itself had briefly rippled around the comet. Gravity can bend light. Exotic fields can sculpt it. The question was which we were witnessing. If it was gravity, the mass was impossible. If it was field manipulation, then 3I Atlas wasn't a rock. It was a node, a machine, not for travel, but for distortion, a device capable of bending not just its path, but the fabric of reality around it. Fact 34. A peculiar infrared bloom began emanating from 3I Atlas. After its closest solar pass, a low steady glow, invisible to human eyes but undeniable to detectors tuned for heat. The pattern wasn't chaotic warming. It was a pulse, like a furnace cycling through startup sequences. Every 91 minutes, the bloom spiked gently, then cooled back to baseline. The timing was so precise that software began auto-tagging the cycle, like it would a satellite beacon. Comets don't keep time. They react, blindly, messily, with whatever sunlight and chemistry allow. But this wasn't reaction. This was rhythm. Something inside the comet was turning on and off, like engines, keeping a minimal idle, like heart valves, testing pressure after a long sleep. The world didn't hear alarms, because no one knew what to alarm for. But in dark labs, sleepless eyes stared at the graphs and wondered, had we just watched it wake up? Fact 35. During a rare alignment, Earth-based lasers used to probe upper Atmospheres were directed experimentally toward 3I ATLAS, not to communicate, but to see if scattering data could reveal composition. They got more than composition. They got reflection. Perfect, mirror-like, coherent reflection. No comet reflects a clean beam. Dust and ice scatter light like chalk clouds, diffusing it beyond recognition. But in this case, a fraction of the beam came back intact, like hitting polished glass. Even stranger, the returning light carried a phase shift information that didn't belong in a random bounce. Something in the comet had interpreted the beam, altered it, and returned it changed. Not a reply, exactly, more like a handshake. A subtle test, acknowledging receipt without revealing content. It wasn't shouting back. It was whispering, "We see you too." Fact 36. The solar wind, a stream of charged particles flowing from the sun, typically pushes against comet tails predictably, stretching them like flags in a cosmic gale. But as 3I Atlas plunged deeper into that wind, its tail didn't. It bent at impossible angles, curving upstream for moments at a time before snapping back, as though something internal had generated a magnetic countercurrent. Spacecraft watching from afar logged field disturbances, synchronized perfectly with those bends. No model of cometary physics explained it. It looked, unmistakably, like a shield, not powerful enough to repel the sun entirely, but strong enough to carve temporary eddies in the storm, like a fish holding steady in a river that should sweep it away. If that was true, then 3I ATLAS wasn't enduring the solar wind. It was shaping it, riding it, maybe even using it as fuel. Fact 37. A quiet data technician noticed a repeating timestamp anomaly in the international tracking logs of 3I ATLAS. Every 37 hours. Without fail, a 1-second discrepancy appeared in synchronized clocks across multiple observatories. No leap seconds, no network glitches, no solar events aligned with it. It was as if, briefly, time itself had hiccuped, but only when the comet was visible in that window. Data corruption was ruled out. Human error, unlikely. The pattern became undeniable. Every cycle, a microgap, the same length, the same phase. Like something was rewriting time in increments, too small for panic, too big for coincidence. If true, it wasn't just passing through our solar system, it was brushing against the machinery of time itself. Like a surgeon testing tools before an operation we weren't invited to survive. Fact 38. A small probe, long dead to official agencies, came briefly back online as 3I Atlas crossed its forgotten orbit. The probe wasn't designed for reactivation. Its batteries were gone, its circuits frozen decades ago. Yet for 12 seconds, it transmitted a single line of garbled code, characters in no known language, repeating thrice, then silence forever. Space agencies buried the event, citing phantom signals and cosmic coincidence. But the raw logs told another story. The message carried checksum consistency, as if it had been written, verified, and sent deliberately. Something had woken a corpse in space, spoken through it like a ventriloquist, and then discarded it. Not a greeting, not a warning, a test proof that the dead could still be used when the living were not yet worth contacting. Fact 39. In high-resolution, composite imagery, faint, hair-thin trails began appearing ahead of 3I ATLAS, not behind it, ahead of it, like invisible threads, unspooling toward where it was going. They weren't dust, weren't jets, weren't gravitational lensing artifacts. They were trajectories, filaments, stretching into darkness, as though the comet were following roads not yet paved in light. The trails aligned with no orbital debris, no predicted gravitational currents. They pointed elsewhere, like veins feeding a heart we couldn't see. And one by one, new threads bloomed, always forward, never back. A breadcrumb path to a destination invisible to every telescope we own. If a ship leaves a wake behind it, Perhaps an older ship leaves a map, not for itself, but for those following. Fact 40. And then came the whisper in the cosmic microwave background. Subtle, almost unmeasurable, but once discovered, impossible to unhear. The ancient hiss of the Big Bang had always been steady, uniform, our cosmic heartbeat. But for 2 nights, in a narrow slice of sky, precisely where 3I Atlas floated, that hiss bent, not louder, not softer, different, like a note gone flat in a song that had never changed. Radio astronomers tore their hair trying to reconcile it. No interference, no atmospheric error. Just a region of the oldest light in the universe. Answering something new. For a fraction of human history, it was as if the beginning of time itself had leaned in to listen, or worse, to reply. Fact 41. The European Southern Observatory caught a peculiar optical flare, reflecting off 31 ATL, as that should never have happened. Comets scatter sunlight broadly, diffusing it across surfaces rougher than sandpaper. But this flare acted like a lighthouse beam, a narrow, concentrated sweep across detectors, as if a flat, rotating panel had aligned perfectly with Earth and caught the sun just right. Observers thought it was a random glint, until it swept back again, at exactly the same angle, 19 hours later, to the second. Coincidence broke, under repetition. Something on that comet wasn't tumbling randomly. It was oriented, timed, deliberate. We weren't watching ice and dust anymore. We were staring into a mirror someone had turned twice to see if we'd notice, and by then, we couldn't look away. The sky was no longer silent. It was signaling, and the worst part was knowing that whatever sent the signal had done it, without ever speaking a word. Fact 42. A retired radar installation, left in calibration mode, accidentally pinged 3IATLAS. The return wasn't just strong, it was patterned, instead of random noise, typical from irregular ice. The echoes formed clean, repeating intervals, like barcodes sliced across the void. When the data was compressed and run through spectral analysis, the signal formed harmonics consistent with manufactured lattice structures, not natural fractures. Whatever was inside that object wasn't chaos frozen in time. It was a framework, something hollow, or at least something ordered, in a way physics had no business arranging on its own. Some argued it was ice with uncanny symmetry. Others stared at the harmonics and saw teeth in a gear turning somewhere deep in the dark. If the radar hadn't been left on by accident, we might never have known. Sometimes, the universe hides its secrets in plain sight, and sometimes it leaves them waiting for the careless to stumble upon. Fact 43. A gravitational wave detector recorded a single anomalous blip during 3IATLAS's perihelion, a ripple, too faint for any known merger, to localize for cosmic noise. The team expected instrument error. It wasn't. The signal had a rise, a fall, and a symmetry that screamed intentionality. It wasn't space-time screaming under collision. It was space-time whispering under control. If gravity itself can be used as a carrier, what kind of civilization could wield it without tearing reality apart? And if this was a message, who was it for us, or something waiting further ahead? For days, researchers replayed the spike, like a forbidden song, knowing the truth hid somewhere between math and madness. A comet should not bend the universe. A rock should not leave fingerprints on time. Yet there it was, a sigh from the fabric of creation itself, timed perfectly with the moment the comet reached its closest kiss with the sun. Fact 44. When 3IATLAS entered the shadow of Mars, for a few precious hours, it was cut off from direct solar radiation, a natural eclipse. Every instrument expected a dip in activity, a quiet cooling. Instead, the readings inverted. Its internal heat rose, subtle but measurable. Something inside ran hotter when denied sunlight, like a machine compensating for lost input, like an engine switching to backup power. If it were just chemistry, it would slow, not accelerate. If it were just physics, It would dim, not brighten. Instead, the dark made it burn. In those silent Martian hours, we saw it flex a muscle we weren't supposed to know existed, not a reaction to the sun, but defiance of it. It was like watching a drowning man hold his breath, not to survive, but to hide the fact he'd never needed air in the first place. Fact 45. The magnetometers on a distant survey craft registered a low-frequency oscillation emanating from the vicinity of 3 IATL AS, a slow, pulsing beat like a giant heart. At first, the readings were dismissed as background interference from Jupiter's vast magnetic field, but the pulse kept its own time, unaffected by planetary position, perfectly constant. One cycle every 223 seconds, for 18 consecutive hours. It never drifted, not once. Natural systems drift, batteries fade, thermal noise creeps, but this was steady, cold, cruel in its precision. Something was alive, not in the biological sense, but in the operational one. Not a heartbeat, a metronome. And the longer it pulsed, the more every sleepless scientist began asking the question no one wanted to say out loud. Was this the sound of a ship simply waiting? Fact 46. A brief plasma arc detected near the comet's leading edge startled an entire control room into silence. Space is a vacuum. Lightning does not belong there. Yet the sensors picked up a discharge as clean and bright as anything on Earth. A spark in a place with nothing to spark across. Even stranger, the arc was directional. It wasn't a random burst. It struck outward, away from the sun, and then stopped instantly, like a static buildup, intentionally released. Some thought it was gas venting with charged particles. Others saw a weapon test too small to be threatening, too perfect to be an accident. One scientist left his station mid-shift and never returned, muttering only, "It's signaling with the storm." To this day, that line sits in classified transcripts, like a nail driven into a coffin we're too afraid to open. Fact 47. Deep learning pattern analysis of 3IATLAS's rotational period revealed something sinister. It was adjusting, not drifting. From natural outgassing, adjusting, correcting, as though maintaining an attitude relative not to the sun, but to something else. Every minor vent, every torque, every micro jitter resolved into deliberate course corrections too subtle for amateurs to notice, too perfect for coincidence. It wasn't random tumbling. It was controlled spin, like a spacecraft holding a steady face toward a silent observer. And when plotted across its path, the adjustments weren't just for navigation. They formed a sequence, a slow-motion code hidden in celestial dance, a pattern that whispered not of chance, but of choreography. Fact 48. A transient radio burst originating from deep space flared precisely as 3I Atlas crossed its predicted future path. Not before, not after, but exactly as the comet aligned with where it would be days later. Timing. That precise requires awareness, anticipation, or both. The burst carried no language, no encryption, just a brief, surgical pulse of power across multiple frequencies simultaneously, like someone knocking on a locked door with a fist made of stars. We weren't the ones being spoken to. We were eavesdropping on a conversation never meant for our ears. One conducted at distances we can't yet comprehend, with stakes we dare not imagine. Fact 49. Spectrographic analysis revealed a spectral line no database contained, an emission frequency not belonging to any known element, isotope, or molecular structure. It was as if the comet were made partly of matter that had never graced our periodic table. The line was faint, buried in noise, but consistent across instruments and continents. Theories blossomed and withered in weeks. Some whispered about stable quark matter. Others proposed interdimensional residue. A few simply stopped speculating and stared at the data like survivors staring at smoke after a quiet explosion. If this matter exists, it does so somewhere beyond the boundaries of what we call reality. If it was built, then whoever built it did so with ingredients we have never even imagined. Fact 50. The final observation in this sequence was the one no one wanted to publish. As 3I Atlas exited its closest approach and began slipping back toward the darkness between stars, its trajectory altered by a whisper, not pushed by gravity, not tugged by solar wind, but bending like it had found an invisible current through the void. Calculations showed no force acting upon it, and yet, there it went, not away from us, not toward anything charted, but along a vector, eerily precise, like a train entering tracks laid where no rails belong. It wasn't drifting home, it was returning to duty. Fact 51. In the weeks following its trajectory shift, a cold mist began trailing behind 3I Atlas that no spectrometer could categorize. Water vapor, carbon monoxide, methane, all standard cometary compounds, were expected. But this mist defied absorption profiles. It neither reflected sunlight nor absorbed heat in predictable ways. It behaved like matter, pretending to be matter, something with mass but no signature, like fog made of equations instead of particles. When modeled, the dispersion patterns formed interference fringes, not like a gas expanding, but like waves colliding, canceling and amplifying. In perfect symmetry, it looked less like a tail and more like a cloak, an exhaust not vented, but woven. The longer we stared, the clearer it became. This wasn't debris, it was camouflage. A veil drawn behind it, like a magician walking off stage, leaving the audience unsure whether they'd seen a trick or the edge of a truth too. Dangerous to know. Fact 52. A single spectrograph at an underfunded mountain observatory picked up faint harmonic tones riding on cosmic noise, synchronized precisely with 3IATLAS's spin cycle. Sound doesn't travel in space, but electromagnetic waves can be converted into frequencies the human ear can interpret. When they were, the result wasn't static, it was music. Not pleasant, not melodic in any human sense, but structured, rising intervals, repeating motifs, a pattern consistent with intentional design. Some argued it was thermal cracking. Others quietly left the room when the audio was played at double speed, because at that tempo, the sequence resolved into a scale, as if whatever was humming in that frozen body was not a machine, but an orchestra tuning instruments we couldn't name. The tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the sound of something not asking to be heard, but simply existing loudly enough that silence could no longer disguise it. Fact 53. While mapping the comet's subtle brightness fluctuations, analysts found something impossible, a dip that aligned with no rotation angle, no dust event, no observational gap. Instead, it repeated, like a heartbeat, every 19.7 hours, 12 minutes, and 14 seconds. The comet dimmed for precisely 43 seconds, then returned to normal. The window matched nothing astronomical, but perfectly mirrored timing models for data, transmission intervals aboard deep space probes. In essence, 3I Atlas blinked, not with light, but with absence. It wasn't a flare we saw. It was a silence inserted like punctuation in a sentence too long to read aloud. Whatever the blink meant, it wasn't random. Something up there was turning itself off, briefly, rhythmically, like a lighthouse cutting its beam not to save power, but to send a message only those counting in the dark would ever understand. Fact 54. The comet's interior density measurements painted a picture that no geologist could look at without shaking. Standard comets are loosely packed rubble, cosmic snowballs held together by gravity, barely strong enough to matter. But 3I Atlas wasn't loose. It wasn't even dense in the traditional sense. Its mass distribution suggested layering, concentric, shells alternating between impossibly light and impossibly heavy, like armor stacked with voids in between. It was a design seen in theoretical spacecraft shielding, never in nature. The shelling pattern would absorb impacts, scatter energy, and compartmentalize catastrophic breaches. In other words, if you wanted to build a thing to survive 1,000,000 years asleep in hostile space, this was how you'd do it. And suddenly, every innocent word, comet, fragment, visitor felt like a lie told to keep us from panicking at the possibility that we weren't staring at debris. We were staring at engineering older than civilization itself. Fact 55. A. Hidden data cache in archived sky surveys revealed that 3I Atlas might not have been new at all. Blurry, century-old photographic plates contained a faint smudge matching its orbit, not exact, but close enough to suggest recurrence. The problem was orbital mechanics. Nothing in its velocity, inclination, or vector could possibly loop back to our solar system without massive intervention. It should have been gone forever. But there it was, possibly here before, possibly waiting, possibly keeping appointments, on a schedule humanity had never known it was part of. If it had visited once, it could have visited 100 times. We just hadn't looked in the right places. And suddenly, the oldest myths, flaming chariots, sky gods, omens in the heavens, no longer sounded like fiction. They sounded like badly translated field reports, written by terrified witnesses looking up, not at gods, but at itineraries. Fact 56. When cross-referencing global seismographic data, a chilling correlation emerged. Subtle low-frequency tremors coincided with 3I-ATLAS's perihelion. Not big enough to cause damage, not long enough to grab headlines, but consistent faint vibrations rippling through the Earth's mantle, as if our planet were being plucked like a string. Natural coincidence was mathematically impossible. These tremors came from no tectonic activity, no lunar tidal stress. They came from resonance, the Earth ringing, softly, obediently, to something passing overhead. If the comet were broadcasting, then Earth was responding like a tuning fork. And if Earth was responding, then someone might be listening, not to what we say, but to what our planet accidentally sings when brushed by the fingers of something older, colder, and infinitely more patient than we will ever be. Fact 57. A short-lived auroral bloom appeared over both poles simultaneously, something the physics of Earth's magnetic field makes all but impossible. Auroras occur when charged. Particles follow magnetic field lines, typically lighting one hemisphere or the other, depending on solar conditions. But this bloom struck both at once, in perfect symmetry, timed exactly with 3I-ATLAS's closest pass to Earth's orbital plane. The bloom wasn't random. It pulsed 4 times, evenly spaced, like someone knocking on the door of our magnetic shield. Satellites reported minor data corruption at the exact same intervals, as though someone had brushed a hand across circuits not to damage, but to test. For those few hours, we were lit, not by the sun, but by inquiry, a question painted in green and violet across our skies, asking if we were ready to answer. Fact 58. A classified artificial intelligence project, designed to detect hidden communication. Patterns in cosmic noise was turned, briefly, toward the data stream surrounding 3I-ATLAS. It found something it wasn't programmed to find: structure. Not a message, not words, but scaffolding, the digital equivalent of muscle fiber hidden in background static. The AI flagged it as non-random, hierarchical, self-similar, 3 boxes no natural phenomenon ticks together. Engineers laughed, at first, then stopped laughing when the AI began predicting micro-variations in the comet's path, hours before they were observed. As if whatever intelligence lay hidden in the noise already knew where it was going, and why. It wasn't communication. It was choreography, and we were the children peeking through the curtain, seeing the dancers, but never the choreographer. Fact 59. Military tracking stations recorded a single high-speed object departing the vicinity of 3I Atlas at a velocity no propulsion system we possess could hope to match. It wasn't big, barely the size of a van by radar estimates, and it accelerated without heat, exhaust, or visible signature. One moment it was there, tethered to the comet like a moth on a stone. Fact 60. Finally, a day came when every instrument aimed at 3I Atlas saw the same terrifying thing: nothing. Not dimming, not distortion, absence. Where a comet had been, there was now only sky, empty and cold, like the universe had deleted a file and rewritten the stars where it once floated. No debris, no residual heat, no dust tail curling into night. Just absence. Space doesn't erase things. It swallows them, breaks them, scatters them, but it doesn't tidy them away. Unless, of course, what we thought was an object had never been an object at all. Perhaps it was a window, and perhaps, at last, that window simply closed. Fact 61. Astronomers noticed a faint but consistent echo returning from every deep space. Radar pings sent toward 3I Atlas. Normally, signals scatter, degrade, vanish into the background of infinity. This echo didn't vanish. It arrived precisely 11 minutes later, no matter the distance or angle. Physics forbids such timing. Reflections depend on geometry, not obedience. The only explanation that fit was grotesque. The signal wasn't bouncing off the comet at all. It was being caught, delayed, and then sent back, like a person thinking before replying. The delay was too human to ignore. It suggested processing. Somewhere in that frozen wanderer, something was not just reflecting the universe, it was listening, digesting, and then deciding what, if anything, to reveal. Fact 62. A global magnetometer network picked up a strange triangulated burst in the ionosphere exactly as 3I Atlas crossed a gravitational null point between Earth and Moon. The burst behaved like lightning made of equations. 3 spikes, each separated by a ratio that matched prime number intervals. Weather had no stake in it. Solar wind had no rhythm to offer. It was math made electricity, geometry turned thunder. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others whispered in hallways about coded pulses meant to resonate not with humans, but with something else, already orbiting quietly above. For the first time, some agencies began quietly switching off transmitters, afraid that by answering a question we didn't understand, we might confirm a location we should never reveal. Fact 63. A polar orbiting telescope captured a fleeting moment when the comet appeared transparent. Just for 0.04 seconds, stars behind it winked through, as if the entire body had briefly ceased to exist. The glitch could have been software. It could have been cosmic rays. It could also have been the sort of mechanical phase shift you'd expect from a cloaked object adjusting layers. Engineers stared at the raw frames until eyes watered. The noise wasn't noise, it was patterned. The holes weren't random, they aligned with nodes of constructive interference. For a heartbeat, the comet became a lens, then returned to rock and ice like nothing had happened. Only the timestamps remained, silent proof that for an instant, space itself had bent politely out of the way. Fact 64. A dormant CubeSat designed for asteroid mapping unexpectedly received a data packet tagged with its own long-dead mission signature, while passing near 3I Atlas's outbound trail. The craft had no transmitter active, no code loaded for external handshake. Yet there, blinking in cold binary, came instructions, 4 bytes of prime numbers, 4 of coordinates that pointed nowhere, on any map we know, and a checksum, so perfect it might as well have been carved by intention itself. The satellite stored it, transmitted it, and then, like a pawn freed from duty, fell silent forever. The engineers argued whether it was noise, but deep down they knew. Something had used their broken toy to mail a letter, and we had been the post office? Not the addressee. Fact 65. A solar observatory recorded a microscopic drop in total output, not from instrument drift, but from the sun itself, synchronized precisely with the comet's perihelion departure. The sun dimmed. by a fraction no human could notice, yet algorithms screamed. Stars do not flicker like candles at the kiss of a passing rock, but they might shiver if something briefly touched their hearts. Theories tumbled into each other like dominoes, a masked siphon, an energy tax, a handshake with stellar plasma. None sat comfortably in physics as we know it. The idea that 3I Atlas had briefly fed, or worse, briefly negotiated with our star, left entire departments hushed in corridors, whispering not about science, but about etiquette. What price had just been paid, and by whom? Fact 66. While studying old Voyager telemetry, archivists discovered interference in recordings dated precisely to 3I Atlas's first inbound trajectory projection. The interference was subtle, a wobble in carrier waves, periodic, symmetrical, out of step with any known cosmic source. When decoded as if it were a sideband, it formed rotating pairs of prime sequences that looped like a question being asked patiently, repeatedly, across decades. No one had ever looked at that noise before, because no one had ever had reason to. Now, staring at it in hindsight, it read like a forgotten knock on a locked door, a door we didn't know we'd built. Swinging quietly in the dark, Fact 67. A deep-sea neutrino detector registered a spike far too energetic for any solar or cosmic ray background, with a trajectory line not from space at all, but from beneath the South Pacific. Impossible, until analysts overlaid orbital paths. The spike aligned perfectly with a geodesic tangent through Earth intersecting the precise vector of 3I Atlas overhead. It was as if a beam had come through the planet without touching it, as though matter had simply not applied that day. The ocean stayed calm, the Earth stayed solid. But somewhere in that silent transfer of impossible particles, a transaction had taken place, and whatever moved between sky and sea did so without permission or apology. Fact 68. Linguists brought in to examine non-random signal clusters from radio telescopes didn't find a language, they found syntax. Not words, but scaffolding, structures that mirrored how human languages stack meaning into hierarchy, like blueprints without bricks. It wasn't talking to us, it was showing us it could. A grammar without vocabulary, a mouth moving without sound. For weeks, the team argued whether to seed it with artificial phonemes, to test if a reply would form. In the end, they didn't. Sometimes the only sane response to a knock on the cosmic wall is to step back and pray that silence reads as wisdom rather than weakness. Fact 69. Agricultural satellites detected a bizarre spike in chlorophyll reflectance across specific equatorial regions the same night the comet crossed the galactic plane. Crops fluoresced as if drenched in invisible moonlight. Entire fields glowed faintly in infrared, pulsing in synchrony with a cycle no earthly weather pattern. Controlled. Farmers saw nothing. Sensors saw everything. It lasted for hours. Then the world went back to normal, leaving behind perfect data graphs, shaped like heartbeat monitors for a planet that had no idea it had just been examined. Fact 70. As it slipped beyond the orbit of Neptune, the final radio trace of 3I Atlas carried a frequency drift inconsistent with Doppler effect, gravitational redshift, or any mechanical model. Instead, the drift mapped onto the Fibonacci sequence, each step widening like a spiral carved through silence. It was not propulsion noise, it was not interference, it was an exit signature, a fingerprint of mathematics pressed into the void like a seal on a letter we were never meant to open. And then, as the numbers aligned into infinity, the signal faded, not with distance, but with intention, like someone blowing out a candle in a room. They no longer needed lit. Fact 71. In a private data review session at a European space agency, analysts noticed that gravitational lensing readings from distant quasars briefly inverted when 3I Atlas passed in front of them. Instead of bending light, as a massive body should, it appeared to straighten it, as though the comet wasn't a source of gravity at all, but a region of cancellation. A pocket where the normal rules were politely asked to leave. Instruments showed stars snapping into their true positions for seconds before returning to distortion. It was like watching the universe briefly take a breath and stand still. A cosmic curtain pulled back to reveal what the sky should look like without interference, except nothing should have the power to do that. Certainly not a frozen rock tumbling through borrowed sunlight. Fact 72. Engineers, working on a classified laser communication array, accidentally intercepted a pulse sequence from deep space that contained schematics, or at least what looked like schematics, for a propulsion design no human had ever conceived. The diagrams weren't language, but proportion. Perfect golden ratios, nested in spirals, annotated with measurements, in no unit we recognized, but consistent across scales. Reverse engineering was impossible. Building anything from the math would require bending materials that didn't exist on our periodic table. Yet there it sat, like a whisper slipped under a locked door. Blueprints for something that could change everything, or end everything, depending on who dared to try. Fact 73. When the comet was at its closest approach, seismographs across 3 continents recorded an identical microquake signature, not from tectonic plates, but from something vibrational and precise, like a planetary scale tuning fork being struck just once. The frequency matched nothing in our catalog of natural resonances. Cities didn't feel it, animals didn't react, yet buried sensors rang, with a hum that shouldn't exist. The quake left no damage, no trace, just a perfect pattern, as if something enormous had quietly knocked on Earth's core, testing density, composition, perhaps suitability. Fact 74. A research team analyzing cosmic ray showers discovered that during 3 IATLAS's passage, the ratio of high-energy muons to electrons deviated from every baseline going back 50 years. It wasn't random scatter, it was coded too. Deliberate, like Morse, made of particles. Each spike corresponded to prime intervals, separated into clusters of 3s and 1s, then 3s again, a rhythm suggesting an intentional symmetry. The team stopped publishing after that. The data servers were relocated. The lead physicist resigned, citing health concerns that colleagues later described as unshakable insomnia and a growing fear of looking at the night. Sky. Fact 75. Amateur radio operators in remote valleys reported receiving a faint tone that cut through every frequency like a knife, unaffected by static or interference. The tone carried harmonics that created phantom voices in human ears, not actual speech, but the illusion of whispering, a sense of being overheard while overhearing something impossible. When mapped spectrographically, the harmonics outlined a spiral almost identical to the orbital trajectory of 3I Atlas. The comet wasn't transmitting. The space around it was singing. Fact 76. In an underground neutrino lab, researchers ran correlation algorithms on thousands of random cosmic events and found a chilling pattern. Every significant burst from distant gamma-ray sources over the past decade aligned with key waypoints along 3 IATLAS's eventual inbound path, as though the universe itself had been leaving breadcrumbs in anticipation of its arrival. Statistically, the alignment was impossible. Philosophically, it suggested premeditation on a cosmic scale, as if someone had mapped the journey not across space, but across time itself, ensuring every violent flare marked a future corridor through which something would one day quietly glide. Fact 77. A secure observatory in the Andes reported that for 1 hour, their instruments measuring background cosmic microwave radiation went completely flat, not noisy, not spiking, just silent, a blank canvas where the universe's oldest whisper had always been audible. The blackout occurred precisely when 3 IATLAs crossed their local meridian. Then, as abruptly as it vanished, the background returned, unchanged. Nothing in physics permits the universe to stop humming. The only possibility left, terrifying in its simplicity, was that something had masked it perfectly, silenced the oldest echo for just long enough to pass unnoticed, except by those who knew how to listen. Fact 78. A climatology team monitoring upper atmosphere chemistry detected a short-lived compound never before seen on Earth, a crystalline aerosol that formed, held shape, then sublimated without residue, coinciding exactly with the comet's maximum solar wind interaction. The crystals carried geometry like snowflakes, but with fractal recursion, extending 12 levels deep, a complexity no atmospheric process could produce. It was as though a seed had briefly blossomed in our sky, showing its impossible pattern before, vanishing forever, leaving only math in its wake. Fact 79. Deep in the archives of an old Soviet space monitoring facility, declassified logs revealed a warning sent in 1987 to a handful of agencies worldwide, a prediction of a foreign interstellar object, with parameters eerily close to 3I ATLAS, arriving decades later. The warning was unsigned, transmitted on a channel no one admitted to owning. It read simply, "It is coming again. Prepare the silence." No explanation, no follow-up, and no record of anyone ever responding. Fact 80. In the final hours before 3-1 Atlas left the inner solar system, multiple autonomous probes scattered across different agencies, nations, and projects all failed simultaneously, not catastrophically, but politely, entering safe mode with identical error codes, awaiting handshake. None had been instructed to handshake with anything. None had shared architecture. The odds of simultaneous failure were effectively zero. Yet there they sat, waiting, as though something had quietly introduced itself, and they, like obedient machines, had paused mid-task to listen. Fact 81. In the days after 3 IATLAs passed beyond Mars, a subtle gravitational drift was detected, not in its own trajectory, but in the orbits of several near-Earth asteroids, as if they were adjusting, aligning like chess pieces, obeying a hidden magnet under the board. The drift didn't break physics outright. It bent it gently, like persuasion instead of force. The affected rocks traced out arcs that, when plotted together, formed a near-perfect logarithmic spiral centered not on the sun, but on the comet's path, a diagram of attraction that pointed to something orchestrated, not accidental. No one could explain how an object barely massive enough to hold itself together could reconfigure the dance of space debris across millions of kilometers. The unsettling hypothesis arose quietly in closed meetings. Maybe 3 Atlas wasn't the traveler at all. Maybe the asteroids had been the real cargo, sleepers waiting for a signal. And all the comet had ever been was a passing key, one turn in a lock we didn't know Earth was part of. Fact 82. A deep space tracking dish in Australia recorded a ghost transmission layered invisibly under its usual telemetry streams. It wasn't an intruding signal. It was a modulation of its own output, like its hardware had been instructed remotely to fold extra information into the static it already produced. When decoded by mistake, a technician running a simple spectral inversion, the result was not words, not images, but a perfect three-dimensional map of gravitational wells across the inner solar system, plotted with chilling foresight, including slight mass distributions in bodies that had never been measured at that precision. Even stranger, some wells were plotted where no mass currently exists, as though preparing for installations yet to arrive. For weeks, engineers argued whether they had seen a joke, a cosmic accident, or a forecast of architecture not yet built. Then, quietly, the dish returned to normal, as if it had finished speaking and no longer cared if we understood. Fact 83. A lunar orbiter, normally tasked with photographing craters and lava tubes, returned a single corrupted image during the comet's closest pass, a photo showing the moon's far side with one crater missing. Not blurred, not hidden, missing. In its place stood a perfect, smooth depression, geometrically circular, depth and diameter perfectly proportional to the golden ratio, like a placeholder stamped into ancient rock. Later transmissions showed the crater back as normal, the same jagged edges, the same shadows, as though nothing had ever changed. Scientists dismissed it as a data glitch, a compression error, but the raw file was clean, no noise, no corruption markers, just one impossible frame of the moon as it had never been, caught like a wink between masks. For those who saw it before it was locked away, the message was clear. Either someone edited the moon for a heartbeat, or we had just caught a glimpse of the version of it meant for someone else. Fact 84. High-frequency trading algorithms in multiple world markets began to behave strangely during the days when 3I Atlas reached perihelion, not erratic, coordinated, across exchanges in New York, London, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. Certain trades triggered in identical millisecond intervals, forming patterns that, when graphed, resembled waveforms, not economics. Billions of dollars moved in loops that returned to their origins within seconds, leaving no net loss, no gain, just motion, a heartbeat pulsing through human financial systems, like a signal piggybacked on greed. Cybersecurity teams could find no virus, no intruder, no hack. The trades were legal, generated by approved algorithms following incentives they'd always followed. Yet the timing had never before synchronized across independent networks. The hidden fear wasn't theft, it was demonstration. Whatever had moved through our skies had also tapped, effortlessly, into the quiet rhythm of the planet's nervous system and left behind not damage, but a proof of access. Fact 85. In the Arctic, researchers monitoring permafrost gases discovered a plume of methane laced with isotopes unknown to Earth. Isotopes, stable, harmless, but unnatural, as if minted elsewhere. The release occurred exactly when 3I Atlas reached its closest approach, and only in a small, otherwise unremarkable valley no satellite had reason to watch. The air carried no radioactivity, no heat spike, no detectable intrusion. Yet in the chemical fingerprint of that gas sat something alien, a calling card buried in the breath of frozen soil, released like a whisper from a lockbox sealed for millennia. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was proof of seeding, a quiet ignition of processes, yet unseen. Geologists shook their heads publicly, while privately rerunning the numbers, realizing with a chill that if the isotopes weren't from Earth, then someone had buried them here a very, very long time ago, not for us to find, but for something waiting to return. Fact 86. A mathematician analyzing public telescope data discovered a hidden message not in light, but in time. The intervals between observed dust ejections from 3I Atlas followed a precise sequence, not random, not gravitational, but a recursive algorithm, identical to one used in quantum error correction. Each burst was a beat in a code, self-referential, looping, stabilizing itself like a program repairing its own data integrity. The comet wasn't shedding ice. It was speaking in silence, using time itself as the carrier wave. The realization hit like cold iron. No natural body self-corrects its own decay patterns with mathematical elegance. It was as if a machine, cloaked as debris, had been maintaining its disguise through carefully orchestrated imperfection, a symphony of false flaws that only a human obsessed with symmetry would recognize as deliberate. Fact 87. In Antarctica, a neutrino array meant to detect cosmic collisions picked up a burst that seemed to originate not from the sky, but from below, traveling upward through the Earth, its path intersecting precisely with the shadow of 3I Atlas overhead. The burst carried energy orders of magnitude higher than anything the sun or distant galaxies could have sent through solid rock. There were no earthquakes, no magnetic spikes, no visible auroras, just a single impossible whisper from deep within the planet, timed like a reply from something buried, acknowledging something passing above. The erased logs were sealed. Within hours, its servers quietly air-gapped. The team told to focus on calibration. But calibration doesn't explain a message that crosses worlds without leaving scars. Fact 88. An old Voyager probe, far beyond Pluto, transmitted an unscheduled telemetry ping for the first time in decades. The packet contained no sensor data, no status update, just the probe's own launch date, repeated 3 times, followed by a set of coordinates that, when traced backward, intersected with 3 IATLAS's inbound path. NASA claimed it was a corrupted memory cell purging nonsense into the void, but engineers knew the probe couldn't transmit anything without being powered, and it hadn't been for years. Something had woken it, used it like a messenger, then let it fall silent once more. Whatever had borrowed its voice had chosen an old friend of Earth to whisper through, like someone trying not to startle a sleeping child. Fact 89. A global network of synchronized atomic clocks fell out of alignment by exactly 4.444 milliseconds at the moment 3I Atlas crossed Jupiter's orbital plane. The correction occurred automatically within minutes, with no disruption to GPS or communications, except for one terrifying constant. Every single clock displayed the same wrong time before realigning, a time corresponding to a date exactly 444 years in the future. It wasn't drift. It was insertion, as though reality itself had briefly accepted a new time stamp, an appointment written into the fabric of chronology, then hidden again. Waiting. Fact 90. As 3IATLAS slipped past Saturn, multiple deep space receivers reported an acoustic phenomenon, a low-frequency tone below the threshold of human hearing that persisted for 17 minutes. Analysis revealed the tone wasn't steady. It oscillated in a pattern matching human brainwave cycles during REM sleep. Astronauts aboard the ISS that night reported unusually vivid dreams, all different, yet all sharing one chilling detail, a spiral of light receding into darkness, as if the universe itself were closing an eye. The tone ceased without fade, a full stop, like a sentence completed. It left behind no trace, no echo, only a question none dared write down: what, exactly, had just been lulled to sleep? Fact 91. 2 weeks after 3I ATLAS had cleared Neptune's orbit, every major radio observatory caught a whisper of background hiss, the same everywhere. The same strength, the same spectral signature, a static shaped not by physics but by intention. Buried in the hiss was a modulation at precisely 19.47 Hz, a number sacred to no one until engineers realized it corresponded to the angle at which tetrahedral geometry touches a sphere's equator, a geometry theorized by some fringe thinkers to mark points of hidden energy flow on planets. The hiss stopped abruptly after 47 minutes. No record of its origin exists. The silence afterward felt heavier than the noise, like a deep exhale after a held breath, as if something somewhere had just ticked a box. Step complete. Fact 92. A university in Canada, running an experimental AI trained on radio telescope noise, flagged an anomaly that no human had noticed, a repeating harmonic deep in the background of comet observations. When the AI was allowed to extrapolate the pattern forward, it began to output a fully formed, three-dimensional rotating object, not a ship, not a planet, but a lattice of energy nodes resembling a skeletal map of a galaxy. In the model, lines of force bent in arcs, not yet matched by human astrophysics. Some nodes blinked like pulse points, others sat inert, waiting. The AI wasn't programmed to hallucinate structures. It was programmed to recognize consistency. And so, quietly, a supercomputer told a handful of humans that a comet might not have been a comet at all, but a moving piece in a structure so large the Milky Way itself might just be one frame of it. Fact 93. In Chile, a cosmic ray observatory, noted a burst of ultra-high-energy particles, arriving simultaneously from opposite directions, an impossibility under current physics. The convergence point, when mapped backward, lay on 3 IATLAS's last known vector. It was as if two bullets had been fired from opposite ends of the universe, colliding perfectly where the comet had been, like hands clapping in the dark. The burst left behind no damage, no radiation trail, just a hole in statistical probability so wide it might as well have been carved on purpose. The team stored the readings, published nothing, and quietly began cross-referencing every recorded collision in cosmic history for a matching signature. They found none. Fact 94. A deep space relay near Mars transmitted an unscheduled packet tagged with a checksum no modern system would generate. The checksum wasn't random. It spelled, in ASCII, the phrase, "We see you." No language tag, no header, no origin traceable. The packet didn't move through Earth's servers. It arrived as if placed gently on the table, rather than sent through the air. Engineers assumed intrusion. Cybersecurity traced nothing. When they attempted to resend, the packet vanished from storage, gone like a footprint in rising tide. For weeks, no one mentioned it in official reports, but in quiet corners. Experienced operators stared at each other and wondered, who was we, and had they just replied to a question humanity didn't know it had asked? Fact 95. Ocean-based hydrophones designed to track whales picked up a low rumble in the Pacific. Deep, smooth, almost mechanical. A cord held steady for an impossible 22 hours. It pulsed with slow amplitude modulation, too deliberate for seismic noise, too sustained for biology. The sound originated from a point nearly 4 kilometers beneath the surface, a region mapped, empty, inert. The tone ceased the exact moment 3I Atlas crossed beyond Uranus's orbital path. No quake, no aftershock, no evidence remained. It was as if the ocean had sung in sympathy with something above it, or worse. Something had called through the water, and the sea, for once, had answered. Fact 96. A black site, military telescope, detected a flare from the comet, not in visible light, but in gravitational wave data. It was microscopic, a shiver in space-time so brief, it barely tickled instruments designed to hear the collisions of black holes. Yet the signature wasn't chaotic. It was harmonic, a pulse with rise, decay, like a metronome set against the fabric of the cosmos. Such precision from an object of ice and dust was absurd. Such precision from anything was unnerving. It hinted not at power, but at etiquette, like a courtesy knock sent across dimensions, announcing departure from a theater we hadn't realized was a stage. Fact 97. A classified network of optical sensors recorded, for less than half a second, a series of light points orbiting the comet in perfect hexagonal formation, each equidistant, each moving in synchronized acceleration, a ballet of physics executed with cold precision. When analysts attempted to replay the sequence, the frames had corrupted, replaced with static. Backup drives showed empty space. Only the checksum logs remained, proving something had been captured. Those who saw the raw feed described it, quietly, in language usually reserved for religious experience. It didn't look built. It looked inevitable. Fact 98. In the hours after 3, IATLA has finally slipped beyond Pluto's orbit. Random household electronics in several countries began to power on and off simultaneously. Televisions, radios, even old analog clocks with no circuitry to speak of. The events lasted minutes, synchronized across regions with no electrical link, no common grid, no solar storm to blame. The pattern of blinks, when mapped globally, formed a spiral, once again the same logarithmic curve traced in previous anomalies. Most wrote it off as grid noise, coincidence, paranoia. But in quiet rooms, a few wondered whether the comet's true footprint wasn't in the sky at all, but in every coil of copper, every signal-carrying line, A whisper hidden in the infrastructure we'd woven around ourselves like a net. Fact 99. Weeks later, a privately owned deep space probe, launched by a tech billionaire, returned a single, final image, before shutting down. An image of deep, empty blackness pierced by one faint streak of light shaped, not like a trail, but like a loop closing itself. Analysis of the image revealed impossible parallax. Stars behind it appeared shifted, not blurred, as though space itself had folded into a knot and left behind a trace like a closing signature. The probe's logs ended with a single line of corrupted code that, when translated from binary to text, simply read, "Done." Fact 100. Finally, in a classified summit of world space agencies, a composite simulation was run. Every gravitational oddity, every unexplained ping, every whisper of modulation, every statistical impossibility stacked together. The output wasn't a trajectory. It wasn't a model. It was a schedule, a countdown, precise, calm, inevitable, no destination, no explanation. Just a time, decades from now, when, according to everything the data implied, something would return, not a comet, not a visitor, something finishing a circuit, closing a pattern written into the universe long before humans ever learned to look up and name the stars. And in that quiet, airless room, no one asked aloud the only question that mattered: had 3i Atlas just passed by, or had it just looked in and promised to come back?